Pine Ridge Lake sits as a 40-acre spring-fed body of water, surrounded by a patchwork of cabins and newer lakefront homes that reflect 2 generations of living. The older properties, modest and practical, belong mostly to retirees, veterans, and teachers who settled there decades ago for its quiet and its sense of mutual respect. These longtime residents share what they have, borrowing tools, sharing fish after good mornings on the water, and checking on each other through the seasons. Until recently, there were no posted rules, no boards, and no talk of dues. The lake simply worked on neighborly trust. That balance began to shift around 2015 when gentrification reached even this small corner of the county. Larger houses appeared where wooded lots once stood. Landscaping companies replaced vegetable gardens. By the time the community reached its mix of legacy cabins and modern builds, cultural differences had already formed quietly beneath the surface. 6 months before the dispute, Margaret Wyndham arrived in a white BMW SUV with a freshly purchased $800,000 property and a resume that spoke to corporate precision. A former compliance officer from Atlanta, she approached the neighborhood as a project to be restructured. Within 2 weeks of moving in, Margaret called a concerned homeowners meeting in her living room. She arrived prepared with charts, legal-style documents, and a presentation titled Protecting Property Values and Community Safety. Her proposal introduced something Pine Ridge had never known, a formal homeowners association. She argued the HOA would preserve aesthetics, manage shared spaces, and prevent potential liabilities. Her central claim was that the lake itself constituted a common area, requiring a $200 monthly fee from each household for maintenance and insurance. 8 of the 23 property owners, mostly new arrivals, signed her petition that day. Within weeks, certified letters followed, announcing that enrollment was mandatory. For the older residents, it felt like a corporate takeover of something sacred. Where they saw freedom and tradition, she saw unregulated risk. The pattern that would define the months ahead began here: formal paperwork, confident tone, and an assumption of authority that had never been granted. The stage was set for conflict between recorded ownership and imposed management, the beginning of the Pine Ridge Lake dispute. My name is Theo Blackstone, and Pine Ridge Lake became my home in 1999. I came after my wife's death, settled through my grandfather's estate on a 2-acre parcel that touches the water, and began rebuilding a routine that made sense. I framed the cabin myself, set posts, ran wiring, and learned every inch of the shoreline that bordered my lot. What started as work became rhythm: repair, rest, and mornings by the launch. Before any talk of an association, the neighborhood ran on practical cooperation. Retirees, veterans, and teachers traded ladders, borrowed wrenches, and split a good catch without ceremony. People noticed if your dock needed a board and showed up with one. No one audited lawns or counted boats. The lake's order was simple: respect the water, respect the neighbor. Dawn fishing turned into my anchor. I would set out while the air was cool and the water steady, cast along the edges, and return with enough quiet to manage the day. It was consistent, uncomplicated use of the access that came with my parcel, a daily pattern established over years, not weeks. That baseline changed after Margaret Wyndham's arrival and her push for an HOA. When she circulated a proposal describing the lake as a common area with monthly fees, I declined membership. My reason was straightforward. I live here. I do not hold an investment portfolio at the shoreline. I communicated that politely. 2 weeks later, laminated signs appeared around the waterline. Private HOA property, members only. I did not accept the premise that my established access depended on joining a new organization, so I continued my routine. I went early, kept to my side, and did what I had always done. A complaint followed, and Deputy Charlie Morrison drove out. He is local, understands the area, and approached even-handedly. He told me a trespass report had been filed and asked me to leave for the day while matters were worked out. I complied without argument. Those moments clarified the shift. Where the community once relied on neighborliness and individual title, a newly asserted layer of rules now stood between residents and the water. That contrast is why I began reviewing records to understand precisely what authority, if any, supported the change. It required patient reading. After the laminated private HOA property, members-only signs appeared. Enforcement began almost immediately. Margaret Wyndham's first step was documentation. She stood at her window each morning with binoculars and a phone camera, photographing residents who continued to use the lake without paying the $200 fee. Within a week, she filed a formal trespassing complaint with the county naming Theo Blackstone specifically, citing unauthorized use of HOA waters. 48 hours later, Margaret convened an emergency HOA meeting in her living room. 8 property owners attended, mostly those who had signed her petition. The agenda centered on non-compliant residents, and Margaret introduced a new officer, Dale Peaton, a retired bank manager appointed as treasurer. The move gave the operation a veneer of legitimacy. Dale's calm demeanor and background in finance reassured the newcomers that Margaret's leadership was procedural, rather than personal. The following morning, violation notices appeared at several homes. Each notice carried an HOA letterhead, cited aesthetic or access infractions, and warned of accruing daily fines. Betty Kowalski's violation listed her garden gnome collection as an unauthorized decorative installation. The Martinez family received a letter regarding their unapproved fishing boat. Frank Howard, known locally as Old Frank, was cited for a vegetable garden visible from the road, while the Johnsons were warned about an unregistered dock structure that had existed for over a decade. Margaret delivered each notice personally, crossing driveways and clicking heels that signaled determination. The older residents felt blindsided. For decades, none of these issues had drawn a complaint, and now each was framed as a violation of community standards that had never been formally adopted. At the same time, a private security guard appeared near the boat launch, stationed with a clipboard and instructed to monitor non-members. When Theo approached, he asked a simple question: what authority allowed this? The guard hesitated, then replied, "The HOA." Theo nodded, cast his line, and wished the young man a good day. 3 mornings later, the guard was gone. Margaret continued escalating. The pattern was unmistakable. Formal letters, cameras, personal delivery, and a steady rhythm of documentation designed to appear official. Residents began comparing notes and realized none of these measures had ever been approved by the county or recorded in property documents. For Theo, it confirmed his suspicion. Authority was being asserted, not proven, and that realization marked the moment the dispute shifted from neighborhood tension to a matter of record. Theo Blackstone's next step was quiet, methodical, and precise. Early one Tuesday morning, he drove to the county courthouse, a red brick building that had handled every property dispute in the region for generations. Inside, the smell of paper and dust mixed with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. At the land records office, he met Joyce Miller, a veteran clerk whose familiarity with local property maps was unmatched. When Theo explained the situation, Joyce pulled the Pine Ridge Lake file from the archives. Her inspection was immediate and decisive. "These documents," she said, "don't show any properly recorded homeowners association." She pointed to missing boundary surveys, property descriptions, and the absence of legal authority documentation that would define jurisdiction over the lake. Without those records, an HOA's enforcement power was only theoretical. Joyce explained the basics of adverse possession and riparian rights, terms that often surfaced in disputes like this. Adverse possession, she said, required continuous, open, and lawful use over time. It didn't allow a newly formed group to claim authority just by placing signs or sending letters. Riparian rights, on the other hand, protect landowners whose property borders water, giving them access and usage unless specifically restricted by deed or law. Her advice was simple: check the deed, review the surveys, and verify what's recorded before recognizing any HOA claim. Theo thanked her and spent the rest of the morning cross-referencing the plat maps with his grandfather's deed. Each line he traced strengthened his suspicion that the so-called HOA waters overlapped with parcels that predated Margaret Wyndham's property entirely. Meanwhile, Margaret wasn't slowing down. Over the next 2 weeks, Theo received a series of county complaints filed by her directly, one alleging that his boat motor violated community peace, another claiming that his septic system endangered lake quality, and a third insisting that his dock was unpermitted. Each complaint required a county inspection. Each inspection came back clean. The difference between paperwork and proof had never been clearer. While Margaret built her authority through assertion, Theo began to build his through documentation. Before leaving the courthouse, he made one more decision. He would hire a licensed surveyor to map his property boundaries precisely. It was time to move from local advice to measurable evidence. When the surveyor Jake Patterson arrived at Pine Ridge Lake, his measuring equipment caught the attention of nearly every neighbor. He spent hours marking distances, recording elevation points, and aligning coordinates with the old county plat. By midday, his findings began to tell a story that confirmed Theo's instincts. According to Jake's data, Theo's property line extended 30 feet farther into the lake than any recent map suggested. The margin wasn't small. It was enough to redefine where private property ended and the supposed HOA waters began. As Jake reviewed his notes, he mentioned something else curious. Older property records referenced historic mining claims tied to the area's shoreline, dating back to the mid-20th century. He advised Theo to check the Thompson Mining Company archives if he wanted to understand exactly what rights his grandfather might have inherited. That same evening, Theo found an anonymous envelope in his mailbox, handwritten on expensive stationery, inked in a formal script. The note read only, "Check the old Thompson Mining Company records at the state archives. No name, no return address." Someone inside Margaret's circle clearly had doubts about her legal footing. Meanwhile, Margaret moved forward with what she called a lake beautification project. Under that label, she authorized installation of a decorative white vinyl fence that cut directly across the long-established footpath to the lake. The same path residents like Betty Kowalski and Frank Martinez had used for decades. A new sign appeared on the gate. Private HOA property, authorized members only. When Frank questioned the restriction, explaining he had walked that trail since 1987 on doctor's orders for his heart condition, Margaret replied briskly, "Times change. Mr. Martinez, liability requires management." Her newsletter that month repeated the same claim, that the lake was a community asset managed for safety, order, and shared value. She also referenced plans to remove unsafe or unapproved docks, many of which belonged to older residents. The fence, the phrasing, and the selective enforcement carried the same intent: control access by declaring common ownership where none had been proven. For Theo, these changes made his next steps unavoidable. Between Jake's survey results and the mysterious tip about mining deeds, he understood that the issue might extend far beyond HOA filings. Beneath the modern language of fees and safety, there could be a recorded chain of title that told a completely different story, one that had quietly survived since his grandfather's time. By late spring, Pine Ridge Lake had turned from a peaceful retreat into a landscape of paperwork. The next phase of escalation arrived in an official envelope, a cease and desist letter from Margaret Wyndham's newly hired attorney. The document, printed on embossed stationery, demanded that Theo Blackstone pay $500 in administrative fees and immediately stop unauthorized lake activity. The language was dense with legal phrasing: forthwith, pursuant to, and under governing HOA authority. Theo read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on his kitchen table. At that moment, he was repairing Betty Kowalski's porch steps, a reminder that while Margaret built cases, The older residents built community. Margaret followed the letter with a formal fine schedule, circulated to all property owners. It listed penalties such as $50 per day for continued non-compliance and unauthorized lake access by non-members. To reinforce the illusion of order, she installed security cameras at the public launch and near wooded paths, motion-activated, red lights blinking in the night like small warnings. She claimed they were necessary for safety monitoring, though they tracked the same neighbors who had lived there quietly for decades. At the same time, Margaret launched a petition drive, gathering 47 signatures, most from her church circle and new residents, demanding that county commissioners recognize the HOA as the official governing body for Pine Ridge Lake. Her stated objective was to protect property values and enforce consistent community standards. The petition was scheduled to be presented at an upcoming county commissioners meeting, where Margaret planned to request formal endorsement and legal recognition. Theo, meanwhile, focused on documentation. His growing file included property tax receipts bearing the name T. Blackstone, a clear record that he, not any association, had been paying taxes on the lake since inheriting the property. He noted this quietly, waiting for the right venue to present it. Margaret's campaign extended further. She hired a private investigator to examine Theo's background, attempted to contact his part-time employer with vague warnings about ongoing disputes, and spread rumors that he owed back taxes. Each effort failed to produce anything damaging. To strengthen her position, she commissioned a second legal opinion, one that supported HOA enforcement but relied entirely on her own version of facts. The logic was circular, assuming ownership without proving it. Still, Margaret planned her presentation as if victory were certain, arranging for catering, media attendance, and a hired photographer. Theo stayed quiet. His next move wasn't about counterclaims or outrage. It was about records. Deeds, surveys, archives. Facts, not theatrics. The paperwork battle was only beginning. Theo Blackstone's search for answers led him to the state archives, a quiet building filled with boxes of forgotten contracts and ledgers. For 3 days he combed through Thompson Mining Company files dating from the 1940s to the 1960s, tracing every recorded transfer involving Pine Ridge Lake. The evidence was clear. In 1943, Thompson Mining bought the mineral and water rights to the lake for copper exploration. The mine failed, but the rights were never rescinded. In 1965, they passed to a holding company, then in 1978 to individual partners including Theodore Bud Blackstone, Sr., Theo's grandfather. Those rights transferred legally to Theo's father in 1982 and to Theo in 1999, all properly notarized. The deeds granted lake bottom ownership and surface water usage for extraction and related purposes, language modern law interprets to include fishing and boating. The ownership was continuous, with T. Blackstone listed on tax rolls for the lake every year since. A 1962 company survey detailed the lake's depth, springs, and shoreline boundaries, records explaining why Theo's dock exceeded current environmental standards. Theo left with certified copies proving private title and uninterrupted tax history. His case was now grounded not in argument, but in archived fact. Back home, Margaret Wyndham expanded her public campaign. She circulated letters to nearby HOA presidents, shared selective statistics with the local paper, and framed the lake as unregulated common property. Her rhetoric grew confident as Theo's documentation grew stronger. Two versions of the truth now stood ready for review, one built from assertion and signatures, the other from recorded ownership and law. After returning from the archives, Theo met attorney Samuel Bennett, who confirmed the deeds established complete lake bottom and surface rights. They organized a factual, restrained response for the coming county commissioners' meeting. Joyce Miller compiled a precise evidence binder, notices, letters, photographs, all chronologically arranged. 4 families affected by the HOA, Betty Kowalski, Frank Martinez, the Johnsons, and the Martinezes, agreed to appear as witnesses. The tax assessor would verify that T. Blackstone alone paid property taxes on the lake. Bennett drafted a plain language explanation of riparian and mineral rights and created maps and timelines showing each transfer from Thompson Mining to Theo. Deputy Charlie Morrison discreetly confirmed that Margaret had arranged sheriff's presence in case enforcement was granted. Meanwhile, Margaret prepared as if for victory, ordering catering, a photographer, and posting online about restoring order. Her publicity ensured the meeting would be well attended. Theo and Bennett decided to let her present first, allowing her to state claims publicly before introducing the certified deeds. Their strategy emphasized education over confrontation, to demonstrate how ownership and law, properly recorded, outweighed assumption and authority. The county commissioners' meeting drew a crowd large enough to fill every seat. At 7 p.m., Commissioner Harold Williams opened the session. Pine Ridge Lake HOA request for recognition. Margaret Wyndham stepped forward first. Her slideshow, Protecting Our Community Investment, showed docks, boats, and gardens labeled unregulated hazards. Charts claimed falling property values. A photo of Theo Blackstone's tackle box appeared beside the phrase, unauthorized commercial activity. She closed by insisting that no clear, private ownership exists for the lake and asked the county to endorse the HOA's fines and restrictions. When Williams invited responses, Theo Blackstone approached calmly, carrying a single manila folder. He thanked the commissioners, then said, "I'd like to clarify property ownership." Placing a certified deed on the desk, he explained that his grandfather, Theodore Blackstone Sr., purchased all mineral and water rights from Thompson Mining Company in 1943. Those rights had passed by inheritance. To him, each transfer recorded and notarized. Theo showed tax receipts proving he had paid lake taxes since 1999. Attorney Samuel Bennett outlined the legal chain, confirming lake bottom and water usage ownership. Joyce Miller verified the HOA was never incorporated. The tax assessor confirmed Margaret had never paid lakefront taxes. The room fell silent. Dale Peaton, the HOA treasurer, resigned on the spot. After a short recess, Commissioner Williams read the decision. The HOA holds no authority to collect fees or impose restrictions. All signs, fences, and cameras on Mr. Blackstone's property must be removed immediately. Williams ended succinctly. Mr. Blackstone cannot trespass on his own land. Applause followed. Soft, then rising, marking the official close of the Pine Ridge Lake dispute. In the days following the county commissioner's ruling, Pine Ridge Lake settled into a quieter rhythm. Within 72 hours, the unauthorized structures, the white vinyl fence, laminated private HOA property signs, and security cameras were removed under county order. The familiar footpath to the lake, once blocked, was open again. Theo returned to his routine before sunrise, the mist rising from the water as he cast his line into his own property for the first time without confrontation in months. The outcome rippled through the community. 3 families formally withdrew from Margaret Wyndham's HOA immediately. Without a treasurer, without legal standing, and without confidence, the association dissolved informally within a week. Dues stopped arriving, meetings were canceled, and residents quietly peeled HOA stickers from their mailboxes. Margaret herself placed a for sale sign on her property. Her BMW vanished by the following Monday. The house sold weeks later, below market value, to a family seeking peace and fishing access. In place of tension, collaboration returned. Betty Kowalski organized a community workday to repair the path and restore damaged areas near the fence line. 23 residents showed up with shovels, lumber, and coffee. Even those who had once supported the HOA lent a hand, some offering apologies, others silent but present. What had been a fight about authority became an act of restoration. Beyond the lake, the case's influence spread. Joyce Miller arranged a Know Your Property Rights workshop at the county library, inviting Bennett to explain how to read deeds, verify boundaries, and check HOA filings. Attendance exceeded capacity, with residents from 3 counties taking notes. The county commissioners adopted new policies requiring stricter documentation for HOA formation and enforcement claims, closing the loophole that had allowed Margaret's efforts to gain temporary traction. Theo created a simple access agreement for his neighbors: no dues, no committees, just courtesy, respect hours, avoid littering, and treat the water as shared peace. His sign at the launch read, "Blackstone Family Lake, fish responsibly." Each year afterward, the community hosted a lake cleanup and gnome garden tour, both started by Betty. The laughter and chatter replaced the months of complaints. The story of Pine Ridge Lake became a quiet lesson retold at county meetings and neighborhood gatherings. That ownership, when coupled with fairness, can strengthen community far more than control ever will.